years. He has very broad research interests in artificial intelligence, but probably is best known for his research in speech recognition. It's actually an area that he started as a graduate student at Stanford, and he's continued it for the last 30-some years. But beyond the speech research, Raj has very broad research interests that include contributions to digital libraries, ubiquitous computing, gigabit networks, distance learning, and others. Raj served as the founding director of the Robotics Institute, and he's also been a dean of the School of Computer Science. He was the second dean. Raj currently is the co-chair of the President Information Technology Advisory Council, better known as PTAC. It's an organization that was fairly influential in providing additional federal funding for the field of information technology. Raj's talk is on infinite memory and bandwidth implications for artificial intelligence. And before he comes up, let me just make one other point. It was about 4.5 years ago that we got a request from Raj to the central administration saying that the School of Computer Science needed more space. And so we took the request, we looked at it, it was in fact validated. We went through the design, the build, the construction, and today we're going to celebrate the opening of Newell Simon Hall. So Raj really gets credit for having started the whole effort 4.5 years ago. Let's welcome Raj.
Thank you. Good afternoon. It's indeed a pleasure for me to speak at this symposium honoring Alan Newell and Herb Simon. I came to CMU in 1969 mainly because this was the home of Newell and Simon. It's been an amazing 30 years, and the next 50 years promise to be even more exciting, as the topics at the symposium indicate. The main thesis of my talk today is none of the dire consequences of Bill Joy are the projections of Kurzweil and Moravec about the possible emergence of a robot nation will come to pass. So you can all rest easy. Not because they're incorrect, but because we live in a society in which progress depends on the investment of research dollars. Many of the early predictions of AI never had a chance of being realized because the pundits of research policy did not see the benefit to society of investing in tasks such as chess playing and theorem proving. I do not now see that the society is about ready to invest billions of dollars needed to create robots that will exceed human capability. Policymakers in Congress seem to be more comfortable with investing in healthcare research than information technology. For example, this year, the increment in research budgets to NIH was $2.3 billion, while the increment to IT research budget was only $125 million. In spite of the fact that 1/3 of all the jobs created in the last 50 years are in the IT-related fields, and over 25% of all the taxes paid in this country come from IT businesses, IT workers, and the capital gain taxes paid by the dot-com millionaires. The other source of funds, namely the venture capitalists, are likely to be of no help either. They seem to want to invest primarily in IT research with near-term market potential. A more likely scenario may be the emergence of artificial intelligences with superhuman capabilities. These will emerge in the guise of intelligent agents and productivity tools, providing some individuals with capabilities that will appear to be extraordinary to the rest of us. The consequences of such technologies are worthy of introspection, examination, and debate. First, let us look at the technology trends that are fueling this debate. This year, as expected, we are beginning to see the arrival of a GigaPC, which delivers 1 billion operations per second, 1 billion bits of memory, and a 1 billion-bit gigabit Ethernet connection, all available for less than $2,000. Barring the creation of a cartel or some unforeseen technological barrier, we should see a TeraPC, a trillion operations per second computer, by year 2015, and a PetaPC, a 1,000 trillion operations per second PC, by year 2030. The question is, what will we do with all this power? In support of Dave Clark's comment this morning, in our society will hardly change. Our social systems, the food we eat, the clothes we wear, and the mating rituals will hardly be affected because of this PetaPCs. Others, such as the way we learn, the way we work, the way we communicate and interact with each other, and the quality and the delivery of healthcare, will undergo profound changes. Some of the computing power will also be used to create self-healing computers and self-healing networks that will never fail, and self-healing software that will never need rebooting. Advances in magnetic disk memory have been even more startling. Disk densities have been doubling every 12 months. In early 1970, I remember paying over $1 million for a gigabyte of disk space. Today you can buy it for $3.50. You can buy a 30 gigabyte disk, in fact we just bought some, for about $100 today. In 30 gigabytes, you can store 10 hours of video, 100 paintings, 1,000 hours of MP3 music, and 10,000 books, larger than many of our personal collections at home. By year 2010, 10 years from now, we should see a 1,000-fold improvement in this price performance. That means we should be able to buy 30 terabytes for about $100. At that cost, each of us can have a personal library of several million books. By the way, if you read a book every day from the time you're born to the time you die, you can only read about 30,000 books. A lifetime collection of music and movies, all on our home PCs. What we don't have on our PCs will be available at the click of a mouse from the Universal Digital Library, containing all the creative works of the human race. By 2020 now, another 10 years later, you will be able to buy 30 petabytes for $100. Essentially an infinite amount of memory for all practical purposes. What can you do with a petabyte? That boggles the mind, because already with a terabyte, 30 terabytes, most of the needs I could think of are satisfied. If you choose to, you'll be able to capture everything you said from the time you're born, your baby babble, to the time you die, your last gasp, for less than 1% of a petabyte. Right? Everything you ever did and experienced can be captured in living color, in only a few petabytes. So if you can buy 30 petabytes for $100, all of this will only cost a few bucks, less than the price of a pizza, which will still cost you the same even in year 2020. Most dramatic of the recent technological advances have been the doubling of the bandwidth every 8 months, propelled by the fiber optic technology. Today, you can buy commercial systems that permit transmission of 1.6 trillion bits per second on a single fiber using what is called dense wavelength division multiplexing technologies. In this technology, one uses 160 different wavelengths, different colors, each capable of transmitting 10 gigabits per second, hence the 1.6 terabits. Experimental systems in the laboratories are able to transmit as much as 25 terabits per second on a single fiber today. Again, you can ask the question, what can you do with all this bandwidth? For example, using the commercial systems of 1.6 terabits, in 1 second, you can transmit 10 high-definition TV movies at 20 gigabytes each. Or you can transmit 40 regular full-length movies in 1 second. Or you can transmit 20,000 hours of MPEG-3 music. It will satisfy the entire city of Pittsburgh in 1 second. And then we'll have to listen to it for many hours. It would take about 50 seconds to transmit all the books in the Library of Congress. And all the phone calls in the world can be carried on a single fiber with room to spare. The main bottleneck today is not the bandwidth, but rather the speed at which computers are able to swallow these bits that are pouring into them, capable of accepting and switching data packets arriving at terabit data rates. Only recently have there been routers that can even accept 10 gigabits, leave alone terabits, data rates, and that too from one of their startups founded by a CMU alumnus called Juniper Networks. The speed of light is also a problem. The maximum sustainable bandwidth using TCP/IP protocols is governed by the round-trip delay times. And at terabit data rates, and with a round-trip delay times of about 30 milliseconds, you would have transmitted 30 billion bits before you get an acknowledgement. That's the other host is dead or something. So, it's expected that this exponential doubling of memory and bandwidth will continue for the next 10, 20 years, leading to availability of petabyte of disks and petabytes of bandwidth, petabytes per second bandwidth, at costs of pennies per day. This qualitatively changes the way we think of computation and algorithm design, because we can compensate for scarcity of one computational resource by another. This is nothing new. Ever since the 1950s, computer scientists have been using such techniques, such compensation techniques. For example, to minimize computation needed to compute sine and cosines, we used to store them in tables. To minimize memory usage, we used iterative and recursive algorithms. To minimize bandwidth, computer architects developed registers and caching architectures. These concepts are equally valid today and can be stated broadly as follows. Memory can compensate for lack of computation, bandwidth can compensate for lack of memory, and computation can compensate for lack of bandwidth. It's a circular relationship. And vice versa. As we head towards computational resources, which are for all practical purposes infinite, we can expect that permitting exchange of one scarce resource by another, will lead to revolutionary consequences. So in this talk, in the rest of this talk, I'd like to concentrate on the implications for artificial intelligence. In particular, I'd like to re-examine concepts such as teleportation, time travel, immortality, and explore alternative realities than those proposed by science fiction writers. First, let us examine the prospects for teleportation. With increased bandwidth and computational capabilities, it will become possible to perform 3D visualizations, remote control of micro-robotic surgery, and other sophisticated procedures. This is not quite teleportation in the classical sense of Star Trek. But consider the following. If you can watch the Super Bowl from the vantage point of the quarterback in the midfield, or can repair a robot that has fallen down on the surface of Mars, or perform telesurgery 3,000 miles away, then you have the functional equivalent of teleportation, bringing the world to us and bringing us to the world, atoms to bits. This form of teleportation promises to become a reality given recent advances at CMU, recent means in the last 5 years or so, by Professor Kannadi and other researchers. They have created a 3D modeling and a multi-baseline stereo theory which permits a dome of television cameras looking at the viewpoint continuously to create a virtualized reality representation of the scene. The range or depth of every point in the image is computed. The scene can be reconstructed with the depth and the intensity information by placing a virtual soft camera from the front or top or left or right, or let the soft camera move freely in space. Currently, such a system requires trillion operations per second of computation for reconstruction of a basketball scene. If you were to take the new Steelers Stadium and use 10,000 high-definition cameras throughout the stadium, you can create a 3D representation of the entire stadium, including where every player is and where the ball is and what is happening. And you can place your soft camera sitting on your couch in your house and say, I want to place myself next to the quarterback and see what he is seeing, and you'll be able to do so. Only thing, of course, is this will require 20 petaflops. Here we can use up all those cycles we were talking about. 20,000 trillion operations of computation and several trillion bits of bandwidth. So that's one view of teleportation. It's not quite Star Trek-like, but this is something that is technologically achievable. Now we come to the prospect of time travel. In the future, it will no longer be essential for a teacher or a student to be at the same place at the same time. For example, if we had captured Einstein in living color and 3D when he was alive, it would be technically possible today to have an imaginary conversation with him. Scott Stevens, whom you saw this morning, and Don Marinelli have indeed created such a synthetic interview with Einstein. It was make-believe, to demonstrate this concept in 1996. They are also, they have established a company called Grand Illusion Studios, and they are hoping to create a service that will permit each of you to converse with your great-great-great-grandchildren and have a conversation with them in a personal history communication. This is not quite time travel as you've grown to expect from Star Trek, but it's another example of substituting bits for atoms to achieve an equivalent experience. Actually, one of the episodes that Alex Singer showed you this morning in the Star Trek Next Generation features a holodeck where people were conversing with each other, including Einstein and Newton and Data. And anyone else, the assumption there is we should be able to converse with anyone else in the same way, except this facility will only be available to people that are alive in the 21st century, because past is past and we can't capture it anymore. With some pre-planning and appropriate data capture, future generations will be able to experience virtual time travel into the past and interact with the past generations. But what about time travel into the future? One could invent alternative futures by developing simulated environments using virtual world technologies, such as the one once pioneered by our own faculty member, Randy Pausch, in his popular CMU course. While it would not be time travel into the real future, it would be an instructive planning and training tool. Now we come to the idea of immortality. Again, I'd like to present an alternative realization to what Hans Moravec has suggested in his book, Mind Children. Hans says one way to achieve immortality is by scanning the brain at high enough resolution to create a faithful silicon model that can have an independent existence outside of the biological limitations of the human tissue. I'd like to propose an alternative future. Immortality should not be thought of as some mystical transfer of atoms from one brain to another, as in Star Trek. It could also be viewed purely from an information theoretic point of view, an information technology perspective, where you provide your clone with all the important extra genetic experiences of everything you've ever said and did. There's work underway in areas such as geriatric robotics that will help senior citizens with some disabilities lead normal lives well beyond their prime. And you might ask, can this go on forever? Transplant surgeries are one way of extending life expectancy beyond 100 years or so. And given the advances in cloning, we may be getting closer to the idea of achieving the dream of immortality, but in a different way. As Nathan Myhrvold points out, it's not the DNA, but you need to download the software in your brain, download the extra genetic experiences you have accumulated in a lifetime. One possibility might be to bring you back to life in the 4th millennium using a frozen embryo of your clone, and then infuse the clone with all the experiences you have undergone in this lifetime. You can imagine creating a rapid, simulated learning environment in which the new clone with the new brain gets all of your experiences and can live for another generation. Another example of bits to atoms. This process does not lead to immortality in the classical sense, but close enough, especially given that the cloning process can go on every millennium. And that way you can live on forever, except you will be learning the cumulative experiences for all the generations. Lastly, I'd like to discuss the possible emergence of a superhuman race. They're not going to grow up to have horns or some other robotic structures, they will look just like you and me. I mean people who are able to think and act 1,000 times faster than other mere mortals, but without requiring any carbon or silicon-based enhancement to their genetic makeup. They would achieve this superhuman capability through the use of thousands of personal intelligent agents, both on their body and in the cyberspace. These agents will exhibit and realize intelligent behavior, mostly through recognition than by recall, enabled by the availability of infinite memory and bandwidth. Intelligent behavior based on recognition rather than recall and reasoning is also the hallmark of the human intelligence. Two examples of the power of recognition come to mind. First is the number 1729, made famous by the mathematical prodigy Srinivasa Ramanujan, responding to a casual comment by Professor Hardy, who was visiting him in the hospital, who said that the taxi he came in had this uninteresting number 1729. Ramanujan is said to have responded by saying, "On the contrary, Professor Hardy, it's a very interesting number. It is the smallest number which can be which can be expressed as the sum of two cubes in two different ways." 1729 happens to be 10 cubed plus 9 cubed. It's also 12 cubed plus 1 cubed. It's also smallest such number in the sequence of numbers that have that particular relationship. Now you might ask, what is the brilliance of this person? How did he know this? How could he think of it in a few milliseconds and respond in a spontaneous way? He has obviously, no wonder it was said of Ramanujan that every number was his friend. He had obviously discovered this relationship at some earlier time and filed it away in his memory. This anecdote provides us with an interesting example of how superhuman capabilities can be demonstrated by utilizing recognition memory instead of complex reasoning processes. Another example of the power of recognition memory is the famous experiment of Chase and Simon in reconstructing the chessboard positions that Jim Morris mentioned this morning. Chess masters are able to reconstruct most of the chessboard by recognizing the classical patterns, while amateurs fail miserably given the same task. At present, the human intelligence is limited by the knowledge that can be acquired and mastered in one's lifetime. We have no mechanisms for instantaneously tapping into the collective wisdom of the human race like the Borgs in Alex Singer's movies. Infinite bandwidth coupled with infinite memory promises to create such a capability. Individual human capability can be augmented in two ways. First, given a problem, thousands of intelligent agents can search and harness the personal knowledge that you possess, contained in terabytes of memory on your body and petabytes of memory on your desktop. Second, agents can query and retrieve relevant knowledge from the knowledge bases belonging to other members of the human race and their agents. Robust, scalable mechanisms for peer-to-peer information sharing are beginning to emerge in systems such as Napster and Nutella. Thus, the future capabilities of an individual will not be merely dependent upon what he or she knows, but what is known to the agents under their control, and what is knowable by the agents by a quick look at the distributed World Bank of knowledge given a problem to be solved. This is somewhat similar to the scene in the movie Matrix, where one character learns to fly the helicopter in a few seconds. You might have wondered, how can this happen? The biological system is incapable of doing it. But if you can imagine 1,000 intelligent agents on your body, which are absorbing a lot of that information and knowledge, and are able to, on your behalf, control the helicopter, then it's entirely feasible, and the learning process doesn't even have to take a few seconds, given the kind of infinite bandwidth we're talking about. So there are alternative scenarios which might become possible, and those individuals who can harness and utilize the power of thousands of agents by using infinite personal recognition memory and accessing the knowledge of the entire human race by harnessing the power of infinite bandwidth will possess superhuman capabilities that would appear to be magical to the rest of us when we see these people performing. Just like Ramanujan's feat with the number 1729. The emergence of a segment of population who can exhibit superhuman capabilities through the effective use of infinite memory and bandwidth is likely to create a new form of digital divide. It could lead to greater concentration of power and wealth in this techno-elite superhuman race, perhaps making the nation-states impotent and irrelevant, and perhaps creating a new world order. I say perhaps because none of these things are likely to happen unless a large number of societal preconditions are met, and the pundits in Washington decides to fund the research. So we come back. In conclusion, the advances of the next 50 years will undoubtedly be as dramatic as the last 50. Capabilities such as accident-avoiding cars, universal access to information and knowledge, entertainment on demand, learning on demand, telemedicine, geriatric robotics will come to pass. More esoteric capabilities such as teleportation, time travel, immortality will be possible, but they may or may not come to pass. It's purely a question of societal judgment and market value that the society perceives in such capabilities. As we find ways to transform atoms to bits, that is, substitute information for space, time, and matter, many of the constraints of our physical universe will assume new meaning and will change the way we live, work, and govern ourselves. This means some of us will have superhuman capabilities, like getting a year's work done in a week, and such capabilities can be used to further increase the gap between the haves and have-nots, or they can also be used to help the poor, the sick, and the illiterate. It is my fervent hope that the Newell Simon Hall will be the home of many of these breakthroughs that will lead to a good world in 2050. Thank you.